The Obama cult is rooted in and the fully ripened fruit of identity politics. How then should its legacy be reckoned? Identity politics has distracted from, and when need be, outright sabotaged a class-based movement that promised profound social change. It counsels black people not to trust whites, as their racism is so entrenched and so omnipresent as to poison their every thought and action. It conveys to poor whites that they, no less than the white billionaire class, are beneficiaries of racism, so that it would be foolhardy of them to ally with black people. It fractures, splinters, fragments a natural and necessary alliance of the have-nots by splicing and dicing them into, literally, an infinitude of subgroups, each of which insists on parity representation in any coalition, creating a cacophony of demands and preempting any possibility of that broad unity and solidarity, which, alone, can defeat the organized, ramified power of wealth. Marx hopefully anticipated that capitalism would flatten the distinctions and divisions riddling the working class, so as to create a mighty homogenized force bound by a common interest in overthrowing the system. The objective of politics, Mao Tse-tung famously exhorted, was to unite the many to defeat the few, whereas identity politics divides the many so as to, designedly or not, enable the few. It conjures a hierarchy of oppressions, in which each group vies with the others for the position of most oppressed. Kimberly Crenshaw says, black women are most oppressed. Angela Davis says it's transgender people, Ibram X. Kendi says it's poor transgender black women. The victors in this inverted oppression sweepstakes, where you win by being the biggest loser, get to leap to the head of the queue as most worthy of preferential treatment, while simultaneously fomenting new resentments among those shoved further and further behind. Then identity politics puts forth demands that either appear radical but are in fact politically inert. Defund the police, abolition of prisons, as they have no practical possibility of achievement, or that leave the overall system intact while still enabling a handful who purport to represent marginalized groups to access, on a parity basis, the exclusive club of the haves. This, in effect, performance politics has spawned a disgusting den of thieves who brand themselves with radical-sounding hashtags, churn out radical-sounding tweets, and insinuate themselves into positions of prominence as they rake in corporate donations, cash corporate paychecks, hang out at the watering holes of the rich and famous, and thence can be safely relied upon not to bite the hand that feeds them. In a word, identity politics is a business. In the case of Black Lives Matter leaders, a most lucrative and dirty business. The enterprising BLM and Sikh leadership, Tamika Malari, Patrisse Cullors, Sean King et al., are the lineal descendants of the civil rights-era poverty pimps who exchanged loyalty to the Democratic Party machine for war on poverty largesse, a Reverend All Sharpton paper doll chain. These BLM grifters pretend to represent bereaved families of blacks murdered by police, but, in fact, lock them out, as well as the grassroots organizations actually fighting police violence. In the meantime, they amass huge personal fortunes denouncing racism, capitalism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, misogyny, etc. On Democracy in the morning, making commercials for Cadillac, cutting multi-million-dollar book and video deals, charging $15,000 per 60 minutes on Zoom to deliver moronic pabulum in the afternoon, and dressing or undressing to the nines at the Grammys and Oscars at night. On the opposite side, the movement behind Bernie Sanders endeavored to build a broad coalition on the premises that the system no longer functions for the overwhelming majority of the American people. That, to make it work, requires a radical redistribution of wealth, and that even as all the have-nots would benefit from our revolution, those who have suffered most would benefit more. In the end, this vision was defeated, although it did plant the seed for a radical agenda in the future. In part, this setback resulted from the infancy of the movement, which still hadn't figured out how to cobble together that grand coalition in which everyone's legitimate rights are respected, none neglected, without alienating any of its constituent parts. But it must also be said, without fear or equivocation, that identity politics, in its many guises, from the cold calculation of the Democratic Party to weaponize biological difference to the preening and posturing of radical chic hustlers, played a most pernicious role in wrecking the most hopeful movement to come along in generations, and has become a fundamental hindrance to the radical transformation of our radically unjust society.